Hello and welcome to my video all about how to make pocket hand warmers. These are basically cotton bags full of rice that you heat in the microwave and then pop them in your pockets to keep your hands warm. This is a really simple sewing project for beginners. Okay, so what are you going to need? Well, you're going to need some uncooked rice, a spoon or a funnel, some 100% cotton fabric and 100% cotton sewing thread. I personally used some cotton flannel, which is the kind of material that's used to make pyjamas. You must make sure that this fabric is 100% cotton, not a cotton blend or polyester, and it mustn't contain any metallic threads. This is because the hand warmers are going to be microwaved and you don't want any synthetic materials to melt or burn. Okay, so that's the most important point. Definitely use 100% cotton for the fabric and the thread. You'll also need some sewing pins, a rotary cutter and cutting mat, a ruler, some scissors, a piece of paper, a pen, a sewing machine or a sewing needle, an iron and ironing board, a microwave, and a magic or disappearing fabric pen or chalk marker. Okay, so first we're going to start by making a template. So take a piece of paper and fold it to the size that you want the hand warmers to be. I'm personally making my hand warmers to fit my coat pockets. You then need to add 1/2 inch to this shape along each edge, and this is to account for the seam allowance. That will give you the final template size. Okay, so next you fold your fabric in half with the front sides together. This is so that we can cut 2 pieces out at once in the next stage. I'm personally working with 1/2 meter of fabric. You then take your template and place it on the fabric. Draw around it with a disappearing fabric pen or a chalk marker, then do this 3 more times. Try to position these outline shapes close together to create as little fabric waste as possible. Then insert a sewing pin through both layers of fabric in the centre of each outlined shape, and then a couple more at the fabric edges. This is just to keep the fabric layers together. If you don't have a rotary cutter, you can cut these shapes out with fabric scissors, but I find it a lot easier to use a rotary cutter. So make sure you put the fabric onto a cutting mat first, and then use the rotary cutter and a metal ruler to cut along the shape outlines. Make sure to cut through both layers of fabric at once, and you'll end up with 4 pairs of fabric shapes. Keeping these pairs of fabric shapes together, insert sewing pins around the edges. Then you need to sew most of the way around each pair of shapes, using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I just used a straight stitch that's 2.5 millimeters long. Remember to use a reinforcement stitch at the beginning and end to secure the thread, and also remember to remove the sewing pins as you go, because you definitely don't want to sew over them. If you don't have a sewing machine, by the way, you can hand sew these shapes instead, although it will be more time consuming. I personally would use a back stitch to do this. When you're sewing around the edge of each of these fabric pairs, make sure that you leave a gap in the stitching of around 2 inches. You'll need this gap in the next step in order to be able to turn these shapes inside out. As you can see, I left the shortest edges of the fabric pairs unsewn. The next step is to use your scissors to cut some excess fabric off the edges. This is so that when you turn the shapes inside out, there won't be a lot of bulk, and therefore they will look neater. So simply take your scissors and cut off the corners of the fabric, as shown here. Just make sure that you don't cut too close to your stitches, as you don't want to create a hole in the hand warmers. Once you've done that, you just need to turn the fabric pouches inside out and press them flat with an iron. Now you need to pair up these fabric pouches by putting one on top of the other, and then line up the edges of each of those two pairs. Then use sewing pins along the edges to keep these fabric pouches in place. You don't need to add pins along the open edge where you left the gap in the previous step, nor along the edge where your hand will go into the warmer. You then use the same sewing stitches as before to sew along the pinned edges. This will give you a pocket shape with an open edge where the rice can now be inserted. You'll now need to insert some rice into these open edges. I did this with a spoon, but it would have been a lot easier with a funnel. Simply insert enough rice to fill each side of the pockets, 3/4 full. As I mentioned previously, the rice must be uncooked. I realised a little too late that on my package it said that the rice had been partially cooked. Ideally, you want to be using entirely uncooked rice, but mine worked fine. The only problem was that when I microwaved it, it gave off quite a bit of steam. So try and go for uncooked rice if you can. Then you need to fold the open edges inwards to make them nice and neat and hide the raw edges. Pin these folds in place and then sew along these edges to fully enclose the rice. Just make sure that there aren't any trapped pieces of rice in the fold because you don't want to be sewing over them. And that completes your hand warmer project. All you have to do now is put the warmers in the microwave for 20 to 30 seconds to heat them up. Just make sure to keep an eye on them when you're heating them, especially for the first time, in case you did accidentally use a synthetic fabric and not 100% cotton. If you don't have a microwave, maybe heat them on a warm, not hot, stovetop or something similar. And then you just put them in your pocket and head out into the cold, cold weather. I really hope you've enjoyed this project, and thank you very much for watching.